And what I found was there's a cycle. There's a big cycle. You start a new world order. In 1945, we began a world order. After the war, they decided how the world would be divided. They created the dollar as the world's reserve currency and so on. And then because there's so much fighting and then you've established a power that is a dominant power, you have a period of peace and prosperity.
What Ray Dalio is about to explain may shock you. Although his words seem mild and well thought out, if you really look through the lines, you will see a man who's signaling something massive. If you have been paying attention to Dalio's recent social media posts, interviews, and public announcements, it's not hard to spot what he's signaling in regards to the future of the United States, a future that I hope he's wrong about. While a figure as big as himself will never outright admit what the true underlying tone of his prediction is due to the dramatic apocalyptic tone, we can easily see the writing on the wall by combing through his most recent words in regards to the economy. You see, Dalio has spent the last few years studying economic cycles and the rise and fall of various civilizations. He's combed through all the economic data and essentially presented it via LinkedIn in a series of posts he called the Changing World Order. In today's video, we are going to focus on one particular portion of his series, a portion he labels the classic toxic mix. What this mix is and what it will lead to, that's the question we're after, and using reliable data, we look to extract from history where this is all headed. Embedded deep in this long post is this magical portion that theorizes what factors bring down countries and great economies like the United States. The first being the country and the people in the country being in bad financial shape.
When you get to the end of the arc, if money is hard, when it was connected to gold or it was gold, they always broke that link. And if it was soft, they would always print more money. And you can't raise living standards by printing more money. You can redistribute it. Certainly the money that is being received by those in the form of checks and they go out and spend it helps their living standards. But what it does is it diminishes the value of that cash, and it diminishes the value of bonds, because bonds are a promise to receive a lot of currency. And it shifts wealth to financial assets. It always sends stocks higher, like my 1971 lesson. It always sends gold higher. And it also always shifts the impact of currency.
Right now, the United States has come a long way since the monumental shift it experienced post-World War II, where it became the epicenter of the world. Referencing this Berkeley University study, we can see that in 1948, 3 years following the war, the top 0.1% of the United States held a 10% share of wealth. That number slowly moved down, where it bottomed in 1978. After 1978, the top 0.1% began an epic rise, now estimated to hold 23% of household wealth. Right now, the United States is facing a situation where 3 billionaires, Warren Buffett, Bezos, and Elon Musk, have more money than the bottom 50% of America. Yes, you heard that correctly. 3 men have more money than 190 million Americans. That situation can also be reflected in another slightly different graph that tells an even bigger story. The top 0.01%. This is the ultra-exclusive club holding 3.5% of household wealth in 1960. Now that number has risen to 11%, rapidly moving up in an almost parabolic fashion. This divide is spreading further and further, and along with the economic shock of the pandemic, financial stress is being created all over. Most importantly, in the government. Here is a direct Dalio quote. From studying 50-plus civil wars and revolutions, it became clear that the single most reliable leading indicator of civil war/revolution is bankrupt government finances, often after an economic shock and when there are big wealth gaps. That is because when the government lacks financial power, it can't financially save those entities in the private sector that the government needs to save to keep the system running. It can't buy what it needs, and it can't pay people to do what it needs them to do. It's out of power. That is exactly what is happening here in the US via the Federal Reserve, which has consistently bailed out institution after institution following hardships. There will come a moment where it can no longer do that, as explained in this clip.
And then that gets extrapolated, and it leads to more debt. fear of bad times diminishes. Opportunities of borrowing and getting in debt, particularly if you have a reserve currency, because the world wants to save in that reserve currency. And that gets the country deeper and deeper in debt. And so you have those debt increases and you have bubbles, but you have prosperity. And bubbles are really fun. They're really enjoyable. They're great. But then you get to the point that there is a limitation to that. And those limitations become apparent when the central bank can't easily produce money and credit. That starts when you hit zero interest rates, because then you can't do it the same. Okay, then you go to that's monetary policy one is interest rate monetary policy. When that doesn't work anymore, you go to the next type of monetary policy, which is printing money and buying financial assets. But that financial purchases of financial assets and other things widen the wealth gap, because those who have financial assets do better than those who don't have financial assets, and you have a wider and wider wealth gap. And when you have that wider wealth gap, and then you have another downturn in an economy, that's a formula for a lot of conflict. And so that's what we see. So what does a central bank then do? If it taxes, it takes money out of the economy. That's not good. It's a problem. Mm-hmm. And if it cuts expenses, that's a problem. So the central bank always, through history, this goes back literally thousands of years, the central bank or the entity that controls money then prints more money. Because think of it, we got all those checks in the mail, and we needed to get all those checks in the mail, but you can't take it away from anybody. So where does it come from, and what are the implications? So that happens for logical reasons. And it often happens at the same time as there's a rising power externally as a competitor, which is a challenge in that environment. So yes, it's one of those times.
To be more specific, when the government runs out of money by running a big deficit, having large debts, and not having access to adequate credit, it has limited options. It can either 1, raise taxes and cut spending a lot, or 2, print a lot of money, which lowers its currency's value. Those governments that have the option to print money always do so because that is the much less painful path, but it leads to investors to run out of money and debt that is being printed. Those governments that can't print money have to raise taxes and cut spending, which drive those with money to run out of the country, state, or other jurisdiction because paying more taxes and losing services is intolerable. If these entities that can't print money have large wealth gaps among their constituents, these moves typically lead to some form of civil war/revolution. Thank you guys for watching, and please make sure you hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed.